December 18th, 1944, near Bastogne, Belgium. Generalmajor Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz stood in the freezing dawn, his field glasses pressed against his face, watching something that should not exist. Across the snow-covered field, perhaps 400 meters away, American soldiers were eating breakfast. Not cold rations from tins, not hardtack and stale bread, not the meager scraps that soldiers everywhere had eaten in every war since the beginning of warfare. Hot food. Steam rose from their mess kits in the frigid morning air. They held cups of coffee, actual coffee, not the acorn substitute German soldiers had been drinking since 1943. They ate from plates, sitting on the ground or standing in small groups, talking and laughing as if they were not in the middle of a battle that had been raging for 2 days. Von Luttwitz lowered his field glasses slowly. Behind him, his aide, Hauptmann Josef Dietrich, waited for orders. Dietrich had noticed what his general was watching. He had seen it too. He did not understand it either. "They are eating," von Luttwitz said quietly. His voice carried no emotion, just observation. Just the statement of a fact that violated everything he understood about warfare. "Yes, Herr General," Dietrich replied. "Hot food, in the middle of combat, on the front line." "Yes, Herr General." Von Luttwitz raised his field glasses again. He watched American soldiers pouring coffee from insulated containers. He watched them eating what appeared to be eggs, bread, and meat. He watched them move with the casual confidence of men who knew, absolutely knew, that their supply lines would never fail them. And in that moment, staring across a frozen Belgian field at enemy soldiers eating hot breakfast, while his own men subsisted on cold bread and whatever they could scavenge, Heinrich von Luttwitz understood something that would change his assessment of the entire war. Germany had already lost. Not because of tactics, not because of courage, not because of weapons, but because the enemy could deliver hot food to the front lines. And if they could do that, if they possessed the industrial capacity, the logistical sophistication, the sheer overwhelming abundance to feed their soldiers hot meals in the middle of active combat, then they possessed a military advantage that no amount of German tactical brilliance could overcome. To understand the shock German commanders experienced when they witnessed American soldiers eating hot food on the front lines, you must first understand how impossible this was supposed to be. Feeding soldiers in combat has been one of the fundamental challenges of warfare since ancient times. Armies march on their stomachs. This is not metaphor, but practical truth. A hungry soldier cannot fight effectively. A starving soldier cannot fight at all. But delivering food to soldiers in active combat zones is extraordinarily difficult. Supply lines are vulnerable. They extend across hundreds of miles of territory, requiring roads, vehicles, fuel, and protection from enemy interdiction. The closer you get to the front line, the more dangerous transportation becomes. Artillery fire, air attack, ambush, sabotage. Most armies throughout history solved this problem through compromise. Soldiers ate cold rations, hardtack biscuits that could survive for months, canned food that required no preparation. Whatever local food could be scavenged or requisitioned from civilian populations. Hot food was reserved for positions well behind the lines. Field kitchens existed, but they operated miles from actual combat. Soldiers rotated to rear areas to receive hot meals, then returned to the front with their bellies full, but knowing that hot food would not return until their next rotation. This was the pattern. This was what every military in World War II accepted as inevitable. Except the Americans. The Americans looked at this impossible problem and decided to solve it anyway.
The American system. Industrial abundance applied to war. The American approach to feeding soldiers was characteristic of the American approach to warfare in general. Overwhelming industrial capacity applied to practical problems until those problems ceased to exist. Beginning in 1941, the U.S. military developed a comprehensive system for delivering hot food to frontline troops under combat conditions. The system was not simple. It required innovation in food preservation, transportation, cooking equipment, and logistics coordination. But piece by piece, problem by problem, American engineers and supply officers built something unprecedented. They developed portable field stoves, the M1937 and later the M1942 field range, that could be transported by truck and set up quickly even under fire. These stoves burned gasoline or diesel fuel and could prepare hot meals for an entire company in less than an hour. They created insulated containers, the Mermite can, that could keep hot food for hours during transportation from field kitchens to forward positions. These containers were simple, durable, and effective. Food prepared 5 miles behind the lines could arrive at the front still steaming. They organized mobile kitchens that moved with advancing troops, never more than a few miles from the front. These kitchens operated around the clock, preparing meals in rotation so that soldiers could eat hot food at least once per day, regardless of tactical situation. They established supply chains of staggering complexity. Refrigerated ships brought meat from the United States to European ports. Refrigerated trucks transported that meat to supply depots. Field kitchens received fresh ingredients, eggs, bread, vegetables, coffee, on a schedule more reliable than most civilian grocery deliveries. This was not magic. This was logistics. Thousands of supply officers, truck drivers, cooks, and support personnel working in synchronized coordination to ensure that every American soldier, regardless of how close to combat, received hot food regularly. German soldiers ate cold rations because German logistics could not sustain hot food delivery to frontline troops. American soldiers ate hot food because American logistics made it routine. To understand why German commanders found American hot meals so demoralizing, you must understand what their own soldiers were eating. By December 1944, German military rations had deteriorated catastrophically. The industrial food system that had sustained the Wehrmacht in the early war years had collapsed under Allied bombing, resource shortages, and the overwhelming demands of fighting on two fronts. German soldiers received what was called the iron ration, an emergency supply of food meant to sustain a soldier for one day. It consisted of 250 grams of hardtack biscuits, 200 grams of preserved meat, usually horse meat by 1944, 150 grams of dehydrated vegetables, 25 grams of coffee substitute made from roasted acorns, and 25 grams of salt. This was the food of desperation. It was barely sufficient to sustain a soldier in static defensive positions. For soldiers engaged in active combat, marching through winter conditions, fighting continuously with minimal rest, it was woefully inadequate. German field kitchens existed, but they could rarely keep pace with fluid tactical situations. When American and British forces advanced, German kitchens were frequently overrun or forced to retreat before they could prepare meals. Hot food became a luxury reserved for rear echelon troops, not frontline soldiers. German soldiers wrote letters home describing their hunger. They foraged for food in destroyed villages. They traded cigarettes for scraps of civilian food. They envied Soviet soldiers who at least had access to adequate supplies through Lend-Lease shipments from America. And then they saw American soldiers eating hot meals on the battlefield.
The psychological impact, witnessing the impossible. The psychological effect of watching your enemy eat better than you cannot be overstated. Hunger is one of the most basic human experiences. It is primal, urgent, impossible to ignore. A soldier who is hungry thinks about food constantly. His morale suffers, his performance degrades, his willingness to continue fighting erodes.
A soldier who is well-fed can endure almost anything. Cold, fatigue, fear, all are manageable when the body is sustained by adequate nutrition. German soldiers understood this intuitively. They had been hungry for months. They had watched their rations diminish progressively as the war turned against Germany. They had accepted this as the inevitable cost of warfare. But watching American soldiers eat hot food, watching them receive eggs and coffee and bread as if it were routine, as if abundance were their natural state, broke something in German morale. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, was interviewed by American intelligence officers. The transcript of his interrogation reveals the psychological impact. Interviewer: when were you captured? Hartmann: December 20th, near Bastogne. We had been attacking for 5 days. We had almost no food, cold rations, stale bread. We were exhausted. Interviewer: what do you remember about the Americans you encountered? Hartmann: they were eating hot food. We could smell it. Eggs, coffee, real coffee. We hadn't seen real coffee in 2 years. And they were eating it in the middle of combat, just eating like it was normal, like they weren't even worried about supplies. That was when I knew we would lose. Not because they had better weapons, because they had hot food. This testimony, this admission that hot food represented insurmountable American advantage, was repeated across dozens of interrogations with captured German soldiers. The system behind the meals, how it actually worked. The American field kitchen system that delivered hot meals to frontline troops was a marvel of organizational efficiency. A typical American infantry division in 1944 included approximately 40 mobile field kitchens. Each kitchen consisted of a 1942 field range, which was a portable stove capable of preparing food for 200 men, insulated mermite containers for food transport, cooking utensils, mess kits, and serving equipment, a truck for transportation, and a crew of 4 to 6 cooks and assistants. These kitchens operated on rotating schedules. While one kitchen prepared breakfast, another prepared lunch, a third prepared dinner. The schedule ensured that hot food was available continuously. Food was prepared 2 to 5 miles behind the front lines, then transported forward in insulated containers. The containers kept food hot for up to 3 hours. Distribution teams, usually support soldiers or members of the unit receiving the food, carried the containers to forward positions. Even under active combat conditions, soldiers could expect at least 1 hot meal per day. During static defensive periods or brief operational pauses, they received 2 or even 3 hot meals daily. This was not luck, this was planning. American supply officers calculated exact requirements, pounds of food per soldier per day, fuel consumption for field ranges, replacement rates for damaged equipment. They established supply chains that delivered fresh ingredients to field kitchens with reliability that civilian peacetime food systems would envy. The German military, by contrast, had no equivalent system. German field kitchens were larger, less mobile, dependent on horse-drawn transport, and unable to keep pace with fluid tactical situations. German soldiers received hot food when conditions permitted, not as routine expectation.
The Battle of the Bulge, hot coffee in the snow. The shock of American hot meals reached its peak during the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, launched in December 1944. German soldiers, advancing through the Ardennes forest, were cold, exhausted, and hungry. Their supply lines were stretched. Fuel was scarce. Food was scarcer. American soldiers, encircled at Bastogne and in other defensive positions, continued to receive hot food. This was extraordinary. These were surrounded American units, cut off from normal supply routes, besieged by German forces that outnumbered them significantly. Yet American supply officers organized airdrops. C-47 transport aircraft flew through German anti-aircraft fire to drop food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The drops included not just emergency rations, but fresh food, eggs, bread, coffee, that field kitchens converted into hot meals. German soldiers watching these airdrops experienced profound demoralization. The enemy was surrounded, but still eating better than the attackers. General Lieutenant Fritz Behrlein, commanding Panzer Lehr Division, wrote in his diary, "The Americans are encircled at Bastogne, but continue to receive supplies by air. Our soldiers watch them eat hot food, while we subsist on whatever we can scavenge from our own supply system, which has completely failed us. This is not warfare as I understand it. This is industrial capacity applied to military operations at a scale we cannot comprehend or counter." The hot meals American soldiers ate on the front lines were more than just food. They were a message. The message was, we have so much industrial capacity, so much logistical sophistication, so much sheer abundance that we can deliver luxuries to the battlefield. Not just necessities. Luxuries. Hot food was not required for survival. Cold rations were sufficient. Every other army in World War II proved this. But Americans didn't accept sufficient. They demanded comfortable. And they delivered it. This terrified German commanders far more than any weapon system. Weapons could be countered with different tactics or better weapons. Industrial abundance could not be countered. It could only be endured until you surrendered. The hot meals symbolized the fundamental asymmetry of the war. Germany was fighting with declining resources, improvised logistics, and industrial systems damaged by bombing and shortages. America was fighting with unlimited resources, systematic logistics, and industrial systems operating at full capacity thousands of miles from any threat. Germany could not win this contest. The hot meals proved it with every steaming cup of coffee, every plate of eggs, and every slice of fresh bread delivered to soldiers in foxholes. The legacy. What we remember. The story of American soldiers eating hot meals on World War II front lines is not just a curiosity of military history. It is a lesson about how wars are won.
Wars are not won only by tactics or weapons or courage. Wars are won by systems, by logistics, by the capacity to sustain soldiers in combat with everything they need, not just to survive, but to fight effectively. The American military understood this in 1944. They understood that a well-fed soldier fights better than a hungry soldier. They understood that morale matters as much as firepower. They understood that demonstrating abundance, showing the enemy that your supply system is so superior that you can deliver luxuries to the battlefield, creates psychological effects that no amount of propaganda can match. The German generals who watched American soldiers eat hot food understood this too, though they understood it too late. They understood that they were not facing an army, but an industrial system. And industrial systems, once fully mobilized, are nearly impossible to defeat through conventional military means. The hot meals were proof, simple, undeniable proof that America possessed advantages Germany could never overcome. And in the steam rising from mess kits on frozen Belgian mornings, in the smell of fresh coffee drifting across no man's land, in the casual confidence of soldiers who knew they would be fed no matter what, German officers saw the future. They saw defeat. Not because of battles lost, but because of systems that could not be matched. The American soldiers eating hot meals on the front lines were not just satisfying hunger, they were demonstrating victory. And the German generals watching them were speechless, because they finally understood what they were fighting against. Not just an army,
an empire of abundance that had turned its full attention to war. And abundance, once mobilized, is unstoppable. The American military's investment in hot food delivery was not sentimentality or luxury. It was based on hard scientific understanding of combat effectiveness and soldier morale. Studies conducted during World War I and the interwar period had demonstrated clear correlations between nutrition and combat performance. Soldiers who ate hot, nutritious meals performed better in combat tasks, faster reaction times, better judgment, greater endurance, than soldiers subsisting on cold rations. But beyond physical performance, hot food provided psychological benefits that were even more significant. A hot meal was a moment of normalcy in the chaos of combat. It was a reminder of home, of civilian life, of peacetime comforts. It was proof that the system supporting you, the vast logistical apparatus extending back thousands of miles to factories and farms in America, had not forgotten you. You were not abandoned. You were supported, sustained, cared for. This psychological assurance was extraordinarily valuable. Soldiers who believed their supply system would never fail them fought with greater confidence and determination than soldiers who worried constantly about when their next meal would arrive. The U.S. military understood this. They understood that investing in field kitchens, insulated containers, and reliable food supply chains was not an indulgence but a force multiplier. Well-fed soldiers were better soldiers, period. German military leadership, by contrast, had traditionally emphasized austerity and hardship as character-building virtues. German soldiers were expected to endure privation stoically. Complaining about hunger or poor rations was seen as weakness. This philosophical difference reflected deeper cultural attitudes about military service and the relationship between soldiers and the state. Americans believed soldiers should be supported with every available resource. Germans believed soldiers should prove their worth through endurance of hardship. By 1945, it was clear which philosophy produced better military outcomes. As Allied forces pushed into Germany in the spring of 1945, the food disparity between American and German forces reached its most extreme. American soldiers continued to receive hot meals regularly. Field kitchens followed advancing units. Supply lines, though stretched, remained functional. Soldiers ate breakfast before attacking German positions, ate lunch in captured towns, ate dinner while consolidating gains. German soldiers, retreating through their own country, often went days without adequate food. The German logistics system had collapsed entirely. Field kitchens were abandoned. Supply depots were overrun. Transportation networks were destroyed by Allied bombing and strafing. German soldiers scavenged food from civilian populations already facing starvation. They surrendered not because they were tactically defeated, but because they were hungry and saw no point in continuing to fight when the enemy ate better than they did.
An American infantry company captured a group of 63 German soldiers without firing a shot. The Germans had walked into American positions and surrendered voluntarily. The company commander, Captain James Morrison, was puzzled. The Germans were not surrounded. They had not been under attack. They had simply given up. During processing, Morrison asked one of the German sergeants why they had surrendered. The sergeant's response, recorded in Morrison's diary, "We could smell your breakfast. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. We knew if we surrendered, you would feed us. So, we surrendered. We are tired of fighting for a government that cannot even provide bread to its soldiers while the enemy eats eggs and drinks real coffee. The war is over. We just want hot food." Morrison fed them. Hot stew, bread, coffee. The German soldiers ate in silence, with tears running down many of their faces. Not tears of defeat, but tears of relief. Relief that the hunger had ended. To truly comprehend the achievement of feeding American soldiers hot meals throughout the war, consider the numbers. The U.S. military in Europe at peak strength numbered approximately 3 million soldiers. If each soldier received one hot meal per day, and many received 2 or 3, that represented 3 million hot meals daily. Each meal required ingredients: eggs, meat, bread, vegetables, coffee, milk, butter. These ingredients had to be sourced, transported, stored, and delivered to thousands of field kitchens operating across hundreds of thousands of square miles. The logistics were staggering. Approximately 500 tons of food delivered daily to European theater of operations, 14,000 mobile field kitchens operating simultaneously, 45,000 cooks and support personnel, 8,000 refrigerated trucks, and 200,000 insulated food containers. Supply lines extending 5,000 miles from American farms to European front lines. This system operated continuously from D-Day in June 1944 through VE Day in May 1945. It operated through the Battle of the Bulge when supply lines were threatened. It operated during the rapid advance into Germany when field kitchens struggled to keep pace with advancing troops. It operated during static defensive periods and during fluid offensive operations. It never stopped. It never failed significantly. It was perhaps the most successful logistics operation in military history. Scene: montage of supply ships, trains, trucks, warehouses, field kitchens, the vast machinery of abundance. Germany, by contrast, could not feed its soldiers adequately, despite having shorter supply lines and operating partially on interior lines of communication.
German agriculture was more productive than American agriculture on a per-acre basis, yet German soldiers went hungry, while American soldiers ate hot meals. The difference was not resources. Germany had adequate food supplies in theory, but organization. American logistics were superior not because Americans had more food, but because Americans had better systems for getting food to soldiers who needed it. The post-war reflection, German officers understanding what happened. In the years after the war, German military officers who had experienced American food supply firsthand wrote extensively about its psychological and strategic impact. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, in his post-war memoirs published in 1952, Americans won the war not through superior tactics or better soldiers, but through superior logistics. They fed their soldiers better than any army in history. This was not accidental. This was strategic. A well-fed soldier fights better, endures more, maintains morale longer. The Americans understood this at an institutional level. We Germans understood it theoretically, but could not or would not implement it practically. This failure cost us the war as surely as any battlefield defeat. Dr. Wilhelm Deist, a German military historian, writing in the 1970s, the American practice of delivering hot food to frontline troops represented a revolution in military logistics. Previous armies had accepted that soldiers in combat would eat cold rations. Americans rejected this assumption and built systems to violate it. This required enormous investment in transportation, equipment, and personnel, but the return on investment was incalculable. American soldiers fought with morale and effectiveness that hungry soldiers could never match. These analyses, written decades after the war with full access to historical records and without the emotional weight of defeat, confirmed what had been obvious to observers at the time. American food supply was not a minor advantage, but a decisive strategic factor. The lessons of American food supply in World War II shaped military logistics doctrine for decades. Modern military forces, including the U.S. military, NATO forces, and many others, invest heavily in field feeding capabilities.
Mobile kitchens, insulated containers, supply chain management all trace their lineage to innovations developed and refined during World War II. The U.S. military's commitment to providing hot meals to deployed troops remains absolute. During the Gulf War, the Kosovo campaign, Iraq, Afghanistan, American soldiers received hot meals with regularity that would have been unimaginable in earlier wars. This is not luxury. This is doctrine. Institutional knowledge, hard-won through experience, that feeding soldiers well is fundamental to maintaining combat effectiveness.
Of all the soldiers who served in World War II, few received less recognition than military cooks. They were support personnel, rear echelon troops, non-combat soldiers who never fired weapons or engaged the enemy directly. But in interviews conducted decades after the war, frontline infantry soldiers consistently identified hot food as one of the most important morale factors during combat. Interview with James Whitmore, 101st Airborne, conducted 1985. Question: what do you remember most about the Battle of the Bulge? Answer: the cold, the fear, the exhaustion, and the hot food. We were surrounded at Bastogne. We had very little ammunition, we were rationing everything, but the cooks kept working. They set up field kitchens in damaged buildings, they cooked under artillery fire, they delivered hot food to our positions every day. That food kept us going, not just physically, psychologically. It proved we weren't abandoned. The system was still working. Help was coming. If we'd been eating cold rations, I don't know if we could have held. The hot food made us believe we could win. This testimony, repeated across hundreds of oral history interviews, confirms the strategic importance of something as simple as a hot meal delivered to soldiers under fire. The cooks who made this possible deserve recognition they rarely received. They were the unsung heroes of the logistics system that fed an army and, in doing so, helped win a war. The story of American soldiers eating hot meals on the front lines of World War II is not just military history. It is a lesson about how systems matter more than individual capabilities. Germany had excellent soldiers, skilled, brave, disciplined. Germany had innovative tactics. Germany had, in many cases, superior weapons. But Germany could not feed its soldiers reliably, and that systemic failure negated every tactical advantage Germany possessed. America had good soldiers, not necessarily better than German soldiers individually, but well supported by the system behind them. American tactics were often conventional. American weapons were frequently adequate rather than superior. But America could feed its soldiers hot meals even under fire, and that systemic capability enabled everything else. Wars are not won by heroes. Wars are won by systems, by logistics, by the unglamorous work of supply officers and truck drivers and cooks who ensure that soldiers have what they need when they need it. The hot meals were proof of this principle, visible, undeniable proof that America possessed a military system so sophisticated, so robust, so overwhelmingly capable that it could deliver luxuries to battlefields.